So, we finally reached the end of Genesis. But this isn't just an ending. It's actually a beginning. These last few chapters are this incredible bridge that takes us from the stories of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and starts to lay the groundwork for the entire nation of Israel. This is the moment a family truly starts becoming a people.
All right, so here's our game plan for this journey. First, we're going to follow Jacob to Egypt for a reunion that's been decades in the making. Then we'll see how his family gets settled in this new land. After that, we'll witness a totally surprising, tradition-breaking blessing. Then, we'll listen in on Jacob's final prophecies for his sons. And we'll wrap it all up with one of the most powerful stories of forgiveness you'll find anywhere.
Okay, let's dive right in with chapter 46. This chapter is all about Jacob making this huge, life-altering decision to leave the promised land of Canaan and travel all the way to Egypt to see his son, Joseph, who he thought was dead for years.
I mean, try to put yourself in Jacob's shoes for a second. He's an old man. He's being asked to uproot his entire family and leave Canaan, the very land God promised to him and his forefathers. It probably felt like a huge step backward. So this isn't something he can just jump into. This journey needs a green light from God. So he stops at Beersheba, a place with a ton of family history, to really listen for God's voice.
And boy, does he get an answer. God gives him this powerful three-part promise. First, I will make you a great nation there. So Egypt is going to be like an incubator for his family's growth. Second, I will go down with you. That's a promise of God's personal presence, that he won't be alone. And third, and this is so crucial, I will surely bring you up again. This is the guarantee that this move is just temporary. The real home, the promised land, is not being forgotten.
So how many people are we talking about here? The Bible gives us a very specific number. 70. 70 souls, the entire house of Jacob, make this journey. Now, that number might seem small, but it's incredibly important. This is the tiny seed from which a nation of millions is going to grow during their time in Egypt.
The journey ends with just one of the most moving scenes in the whole book. After 22 long years apart, Joseph goes out to meet his father. They just embrace and weep. You can just feel the weight of all those years of grief lifting. And Jacob's words, "Now let me die." It's not about sadness. It's about pure, overwhelming relief. His life's greatest sorrow has been turned into joy, and he finally feels like his life is complete. Okay, so in chapter 47, the emotional reunion is done, and now it's time to get practical. The family has arrived, but they've got to figure out how to live in this new culture, find a place to call home, all while this terrible famine is gripping the entire region.
And this is where we see this incredible contrast playing out. On one hand, you have the Egyptians. To survive, they're forced to sell their land, their animals, and eventually even themselves, becoming servants to Pharaoh. But on the other hand, Jacob's family gets the best of the best, the incredibly fertile land of Goshen. They're protected, they're fed, and they just thrive. We really get to see Joseph's wisdom in action here. He strategically tells Pharaoh his family are shepherds, a job the Egyptians kind of looked down on. It was a clever move that let them live separately and keep their own identity. And then you get this incredible moment where Jacob, this foreign shepherd, blesses the mighty Pharaoh. Fast forward 17 years, and as Jacob is nearing death, he makes Joseph swear an oath to bury him back in Canaan. It's his final act of faith, showing he trusted in God's promise, not in Egypt's power.
So why does all this matter? Well, because Egypt basically becomes a protective bubble, shielded from the famine and from being absorbed into Egyptian culture. Those 70 people who arrived can now start growing into that great nation God promised. The stage is being perfectly set for the drama of the Exodus.
All right, now we come to a really pivotal and frankly very strange scene in chapter 48. Jacob is on his deathbed, and it's time to pass on the patriarchal blessing. But he does not do it the way anyone expected.
So first, let's be super clear about what this is. The patriarchal blessing was, well, everything. It wasn't just some nice well wishes. It was a spiritually and legally binding declaration that would shape the future. It was about passing on the covenant, the inheritance, the authority, the whole shebang.
Okay, so here's how it all unfolds. First, Jacob does something stunning. He formally adopts Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, putting them on the same level as his own sons. Then Joseph brings them forward, carefully placing the older son, Manasseh, at Jacob's right hand for the main blessing. But Jacob, even though he can barely see, deliberately crosses his hands, putting his right hand on the head of Ephraim, the younger brother. Joseph tries to fix it, thinking his old father is just confused. But Jacob is firm. He says, "I know it, my son, I know it."
He knows exactly what he's doing. He's acting on prophetic insight. And this is a huge theme throughout Genesis, isn't it? God's choice often flips human tradition on its head, choosing the younger over the older. We saw it with Isaac over Ishmael, with Jacob himself over Esau, and now we see it again with Ephraim over Manasseh.
In chapter 49, Jacob calls all 12 of his sons to gather around his deathbed. And he's not just saying his goodbyes. He's about to deliver a series of prophetic poems that will literally define the character and the destiny of the 12 tribes of Israel that will come from them. So let's just look at a few of the big ones. Reuben, the firstborn, he loses his birthright because of a past sin. Simeon and Levi, because of their violent past, are told their descendants will be scattered. Joseph is promised incredible blessing and fruitfulness. But the prophecy that really stands out is for Judah. The scepter shall not depart. This marks Judah as the royal line, the tribe that would eventually give us King David and, much later, the Messiah.
And after he's blessed all of his sons, what is his final command? It's the exact same thing he made Joseph swear to. Do not bury me in Egypt, take me home back to that cave in Canaan. You see, even as he's dying, his focus is completely fixed on God's promise, not on the power and glory of the empire he's living in.
And that brings us to the final chapter, not just of this story, but of the entire book of Genesis. It's the chapter that ties up the family drama and really hammers home the book's main themes of God's providence and redemption. After Jacob dies, he's given what is essentially a state funeral. I mean, the Egyptians mourn him for 70 days. That was an honor usually reserved for pharaohs. And when they take him to be buried, a huge procession of Egyptian officials goes with them. It just shows you the incredible respect that Joseph had earned.
But as soon as they get back to Egypt, you can just feel this old fear start to bubble up among the brothers. Their father, the one person who is kind of a buffer between them and Joseph, is gone, and they are terrified that Joseph was only being nice for their dad's sake, and that now, finally, the hammer is going to fall.
But their fears were totally wrong. Joseph actually weeps when he hears their concerns, and his response is maybe the most powerful line in the entire book. This is the big climax. He doesn't ignore what they did. He calls it out. You thought evil against me. But then he reframes it all through the lens of God's sovereign plan. But God meant it unto good. He could see God's purpose at work even in their absolute worst betrayal.
And then, years later, as Joseph himself is getting old and is near death, his final words are just like his father's. He doesn't talk about Egypt's greatness. He talks about his unwavering faith in God's promise for the future. He makes his own sons swear an oath that when God finally takes them back to the promised land, they will carry his bones with them.
And that's exactly where the book of Genesis leaves us. It's not really a conclusion, it's a cliffhanger, a promise. Jacob is buried safely in Canaan, but Joseph's coffin is still in Egypt, waiting. The book closes with a nation in the making, living in a foreign land, clinging to the hope of a future deliverance. It's a hope that would have to sustain them for the next 400 years until their story finally picks up again in the book of Exodus.